My name is Clara Jensen. I'm 38 years old, and I'm a senior records manager for a historical society. The day after my father's funeral, a gray, drizzly Tuesday, I pulled up to his house, the familiar brick ranch that had been my home for 18 years, and saw them. 3 large moving boxes, taped shut and clearly labeled Clara's stuff, sat forlornly on the curb next to the recycling bins. My brother, Mark, stood on the porch, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips, watching me. A cold knot tightened in my stomach, a familiar sensation whenever Mark was involved. I knew, with absolute certainty, that this wasn't an accident. They hadn't just misplaced my boxes. They had deliberately thrown them out, a final, public dismissal of my presence in our family. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, but I forced my expression to remain neutral. They thought they were humiliating me, cutting me out, but they had no idea what was actually inside one of those boxes, or the quiet, careful steps my father and I had taken. They were about to learn that some things, once discarded, can come back to bite you with surprising force. To understand why this act of petty malice cut so deep, you need to know about my father, Arthur Jensen, and our family dynamic. Dad was a quiet man, a history enthusiast who spent his retirement meticulously researching local lore and cataloging his vast collection of documents and artifacts. He wasn't a wealthy man by any means, but his study was his sanctuary, a testament to a life dedicated to preserving the past. My mother had passed away when I was in college, and in the years that followed, my bond with Dad grew stronger. I, too, had a passion for history and organization, which led me to my career. He often told me, "Some things are worth protecting, Clara, even from those closest to you." It was a phrase that always stuck with me, a quiet warning I hadn't fully understood until much later. My older brother, Mark, 42, and my younger sister, Sarah, 35, never quite understood Dad or me. Mark was all about appearances and quick money, always chasing the next big thing that never quite materialized. Sarah, easily influenced, mirrored Mark's dismissive attitude. They saw Dad's collection as junk and my career as boring. While I lived 2 states away, I was the one flying in every other month, coordinating Dad's doctor appointments, managing his finances, and just sitting with him in his study, listening to his stories. Mark and Sarah, who lived within an hour's drive, rarely visited. Their calls were usually about Dad's health, quickly followed by questions about his assets. The tension escalated when Dad's health began its irreversible decline 6 months ago. He was diagnosed with a particularly aggressive form of pancreatic cancer. I immediately took a leave of absence, moving into his guest room to provide full-time care. Mark and Sarah's visits became more frequent, but their presence felt less like support and more like surveillance. They'd eye the antique furniture, the display cases filled with old coins and local historical ephemera, and Dad's meticulously organized study. "You sure you're not overdoing it, Clara?" Mark had asked one afternoon, watching me help Dad take his medication. "Seems like you're really digging in here." Sarah had chimed in, "Yeah, Dad always said you were good at organizing things. Hope you're not getting carried away." I just smiled, reminding myself of Dad's quiet words. One evening, about a month before he passed, Dad called me into his study. The scent of old paper and pipe tobacco, a smell I associated with comfort and wisdom, filled the air. He looked frail, but his eyes were clear. "Clara," he began, his voice raspy, "I've made some final arrangements. Things I need you to handle." He gestured to a stack of brass-bound journals on his desk, identical to many others he used for his research. "My collection, my life's work," he continued, "I want it to go to the local historical society, properly catalogued and preserved. And this house. I want you to have it. You're the only one who truly appreciates what it represents, what I've built here." My heart ached, but I listened intently. Dad explained that he'd had his lawyer, Mr. Henderson, draft a new codicil to his will, specifically outlining these bequests. He then pulled one of the brass-bound journals from the stack, carefully opened it, and showed me a folded document tucked deep inside, along with a sealed letter addressed to the Historical Society. This is the original codicil, Clara, he whispered, his voice weak. And the letter confirming my wishes. I want you to keep it safe. I'm putting it in one of your boxes in the guest room closet. The ones you brought your books in. They'll never think to look for anything important in your things. He smiled faintly. Some things are worth protecting, Clara, even from those closest to you. He knew his other children would comb through his personal effects, but would likely disregard anything labeled as mine. I nodded, a lump in my throat, understanding the depth of his trust, and the quiet cunning he still possessed. Dad passed peacefully in his sleep 2 weeks later. The funeral was a blur of hushed condolences and forced pleasantries. Mark and Sarah were present, of course, playing the grieving children for the small gathering of family friends and distant relatives. During the reception at the church hall, I overheard Mark telling an aunt, "It's a shame Clara lives so far away. Dad really needed someone closer." Sarah added, "Yes, she was always so busy with her own projects. We had to handle everything here." They were already rewriting the narrative, positioning themselves as the dutiful children and me as the distant, neglectful one, all while subtly hinting at their impending inheritance. I just smiled politely, a quiet observer of their performance. The next morning, I drove back to Dad's house, planning to start the arduous task of going through his belongings. I expected a long, emotional day of sorting, but I certainly didn't expect to find my 3 boxes on the curb. They contained my research notes, some sentimental childhood items I'd kept at Dad's, and the few books I'd brought with me when I moved in to care for him. And, of course, the brass-bound journal with the codicil. Mark was still on the porch, sipping coffee, watching me. "Oh, Clara," he called out, feigning surprise. "You're back. We thought you'd left." Sarah and I were just clearing out some of the clutter. You know, making space. "Didn't realize these were yours. Just assumed they were old donation items Dad never got rid of." He gestured vaguely at my boxes with his coffee cup. Sarah emerged from the house, a dust rag in hand, her eyes meeting mine with a triumphant glint. "Yeah, we're really trying to get things organized before the estate lawyer comes by tomorrow," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Didn't want any stray boxes getting mixed up with Dad's important papers." The implication was clear: my things were trash, irrelevant to Dad's legacy, unworthy of being inside his house. They were trying to erase my presence, to make it seem as though I had no claim, no connection to this home. They were so busy trying to diminish me, they completely missed what they were actually discarding. I walked towards the curb, my heart pounding, but my face remained a mask of calm. "Oh, these are definitely mine," I said, my voice steady. I knelt down, casually opening the top flap of the nearest box, ostensibly to check its contents. My eyes quickly scanned for the familiar dark leather and brass corners of the journal. It was there, nestled between a stack of my own research books and an old photo album. I reached in, my fingers brushing against its spine, and subtly shifted it deeper into the box, ensuring it wasn't visible from the outside. "Thanks for letting me know," I said, standing up and facing them. "I'll take them with me now. Saves me a trip later." Mark scoffed. "Good riddance to bad rubbish, I guess," he muttered, loud enough for me to hear. Sarah giggled. They believed they had won a small, humiliating victory. They didn't know that earlier that week, following Dad's quiet instructions, I had already contacted Mr. Henderson, Dad's lawyer. I hadn't revealed the codicil's exact location, only that I knew where a more recent version of the will was and would bring it to the official reading. Mr. Henderson, a man who had known my father for decades, had simply advised me to ensure its safekeeping and present it at the scheduled time. My father, in his meticulous way, had even sent Mr. Henderson an email confirming his intent to modify his will, adding another layer of authenticity to the codicil. The next morning, the air in Mr. Henderson's office was thick with unspoken tension. Mark and Sarah sat across from me, radiating smug confidence. They had already discussed their plans for the house, selling it, naturally, and dividing the proceeds. They exchanged knowing glances, clearly expecting the reading of Dad's previous will, which split everything equally among the three of us. I, on the other hand, arrived early, as requested, and quietly handed the brass-bound journal to Mr. Henderson. He opened it, carefully removed the folded document and the sealed letter, and gave me a small, approving nod. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and began to read. He started with the standard introductory clauses of my father's previous will. Mark and Sarah shifted, their expressions softening into self-satisfied smiles. Then, Mr. Henderson paused, looking directly at them. However, he stated, his voice firm, a more recent codicil, dated just last month, has been presented and verified. He held up the document. This codicil supersedes certain provisions of the earlier will. The room went silent. Mark's smirk vanished. Sarah's eyes widened. Mr. Henderson continued, his voice unwavering. In this codicil, Arthur Jensen expresses his explicit wish that his entire collection of historical documents and artifacts, housed in his study, be bequeathed to the local historical society, with specific instructions for its cataloging and preservation, and for Clara Jensen to oversee this process as executor of this specific bequest. He then read the part that truly dropped the bomb. Furthermore, it is my express wish that my residential property, located at 142 Maplewood Drive, including all its contents, be bequeathed solely to my daughter, Clara Jensen, in recognition of her dedication to my legacy and her understanding of its value. It was at that moment that their faces turned. The smugness evaporated, replaced by a grotesque contortion of shock, disbelief, and then pure, unadulterated fury. Mark's jaw dropped, his face turning a mottled red. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes darting from Mr. Henderson to me, then back to the document. Their expressions morphed from casual disdain to a raw, exposed rage, as if they had been personally robbed. This is impossible. Mark spluttered, pushing himself halfway out of his chair. She forged it. This is a fraud. Sarah, recovering slightly, pointed a trembling finger at me. You manipulative witch. You must have coerced him. He was sick. Mr. Henderson held up a hand, his expression calm and unyielding. Mr. Jensen was of sound mind when he signed this codicil, witnessed by myself and my paralegal. He also provided a confirming email of his intent prior to its drafting. Furthermore, he explicitly communicated his wishes to me on several occasions, expressing his confidence in Clara's ability to honor his legacy. He then opened the sealed letter from the journal and read a short, heartfelt note from Dad, reiterating his wishes for the Historical Society and for me to have the house, ending with a personal message of love and trust. The subsequent weeks were a whirlwind of legal back and forth, but the codicil was ironclad. Mark and Sarah retained their own lawyer, who quickly confirmed the authenticity of the document. They were left with only a small portion of Dad's monetary assets, far less than they had anticipated, and certainly no share of the house or the collection they so eagerly intended to liquidate. Their attempts to challenge the will were futile, based entirely on their accusations of my alleged manipulation, for which they had no evidence. The relationship, already strained, fractured completely. They refused to speak to me, their last words a volley of bitter accusations. I moved into Dad's house a month later. The first thing I did was retrieve the 3 boxes from my car, bringing them inside, where they belonged. I spent the next several months meticulously cataloging Dad's collection, working closely with the Historical Society, just as he had wanted. It was a labor of love, a way to honor his memory and the trust he had placed in me. Today, I sit in Dad's study, surrounded by his books and artifacts, the scent of old paper still lingering. On his desk, among my own notes for the Historical Society, sits the brass-bound journal that held the codicil. I often run my fingers over its familiar cover. Some things are worth protecting, Clara, even from those closest to you. I understand now that he wasn't just talking about his collection or this house. He was talking about integrity, about trust, and about the quiet power of knowing who you are and what you stand for, even when others try to throw you out with the trash.